Hello and welcome to Thursday Thoughts. Thursday Thoughts? What on earth are they, I hear you ask? Well, my friend Lucy and I meet every week over on Instagram to talk all things personal growth because she is as obsessed with it as I am. And we decided that we might as well put those conversations out as a weekly podcast. So now you can listen to us chat here on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And we'll be talking about topics such as spirituality, limiting beliefs, the ego, imposter syndrome, gratitude, meditation, confidence, and so much more. So if you're ready, here we go.
We're talking about boundaries and saying no, which I think is a big part of boundaries. Do you want to start, Polly, or do you want me
Well,
to start? I don't...
I'm happy to start. I mean, I suppose it's like, what are boundaries? Because like it gets bounded around when we talk about
Yeah.
boundaries. For me, what boundaries mean, it's kind of like it's our ability to own it's our ability to own our sort of our emotions, our ability to own our actions, and not basically own other people's actions, because I think so many of us think, oh, it's all the other people's fault. Oh my God, that person's really annoying me, or I haven't, it's basically about owning what your actions are and your emotions are, so that you're not affected by the other people around you who might be encroaching in your own personal space. It's kind of like it's almost, by putting boundaries in, you are creating the space you need in order to thrive. I think that's how I see it.
Completely. I totally agree. And I think boundaries are, I think number one, they're really important, but I think number two, they're really hard, or they can be really hard to put in place, because I think particularly, dare I say it, particularly for women, we've been brought up to be people pleasers and to, just make sure everybody around us is okay. So we kind of neglect to tend to our own needs. So I think that boundaries can be quite hard to put in place, but it's important to point out that boundaries are for us. They're not for the other people. They're for us. And I think a really, really big part, like I just said at the beginning, I think a really big part of a conversation about boundaries is being able to say no. When I think about boundaries, I always immediately think of the ability to say no. And I think we're so scared of saying no to people. And I used to be like that. But then what would happen is I would end up doing things and agreeing to things that I didn't want to be doing, because I was too scared to upset someone or hurt someone or piss somebody off. So I think being able to say no is a really important thing. And I think what people, I think people can sometimes think that by saying no, like if you just something really simple like, no, I don't want to go to this party or this night out or whatever it is, I think there's a tendency to just feel really guilty about that and like you're doing something wrong. But actually, that's kind of crazy, I think, because we should be able to say what we actually do or don't want to do. But I think just very, very simply saying no can be incredibly difficult. What do you think?
Well, absolutely. And I think it all comes back to back to the way we've been brought up.
Yeah.
If you think about, I think about how we're all brought up. We are told by this is okay talking for myself, but you're very much taught to put other people's needs before your own. So you would kind of, it's like, we'll let that person go first on the swing, or hold back if there's not enough food when we've got guests around, or basically other people, we're taught to put other people's needs before our own. And so we keep that, those are our learned behaviors. And so we then start to believe that is the truth about situations. Also things like, when you have to go and kiss smelly old great Uncle Ted and you really don't give him a kiss, and your parents are going, go and give him a hug or something. It's like, I don't want to, but again, your needs aren't being met. You're not being listened to, because we all do it. It's just part of the way we've been brought up. And so as we get older, it's no surprising that it just feels more comfortable to just be that, to do what goes against what we really want, because that's just the way we've been brought up. And actually, I think in order to get over that, what we need to do is kind of it's realize that those are all untruths. They're not. It's not reality. And so that is what. So it's kind of like we've got to question those
Yeah.
beliefs, and that is what is making us feel so uncomfortable to say no. It's because it's a really deep-rooted, embedded belief in our systems. So it's about unpicking that and just going, actually, all it's okay to say no, and again it all comes back to that sort of love, safety and belonging. That is what we've all been searching for. We don't ever want to upset somebody by saying no. We want to make people happy. We also want to feel included, and we don't want to be left out. But I think what we have to remember is that when we say no to something, we're saying yes to ourselves, and vice versa. When we say yes to something we don't want to do, we're saying no. It's that
Yeah.
polarity of yes and no. We, as we've said before, we've only got a certain amount of time. It's the one finite resource we do all have, 24 hours in a day. So we can't do everything. And particularly those things we don't want to do. So we've got to start to understand that we've got to be able to, if we want to put ourselves first or do something for us, then sometimes we have got to say no. But there are certain things we can do to practice saying no. But yeah, that.
Yeah. No, I mean, absolute God. I mean, you've made some really, really great points. I completely agree. And I think it's the first thing to sort of, or one of the first things to remember is that it is okay to set boundaries with people. Like, there is nothing wrong with setting boundaries with friends, or setting boundaries in relationships, or setting boundaries with family, or whoever it may be. And as we've talked about before on the podcast, if you are not setting boundaries, and therefore you're just kind of being taken along by the tide of life and just being thrown around and not necessarily doing what is right for you and what you need, then all that means is that you are not actually able to be showing up as the best version of yourself, and that is not good for the people around you also. And one thing I would say is that if you are not setting boundaries with somebody, what tends to happen is that actually resentment builds up. Because if you keep, again, saying yes when you mean no, or whatever it may be, or doing things, let's say a friend keeps, take, and you're sort of giving a lot of time to this friend and they're not reciprocating and all the rest of it. What actually happens is that by not putting those boundaries in place and not saying how you really feel, you then end up with this sort of built up resentment, which then at some point is going to come out on that friend, and it's going to go pear-shaped anyway. So
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that's important to remember, is that if you are continually doing things for, and of course we want to do things for other people, like obviously we all want to do things for other people, of course, that's a given. But it's not about not doing things for other people. It's just about knowing where to draw that line, and knowing what is good for you and what you need for your mental health and for your happiness, because ultimately that should be your priority. We have to, and again, I know this can come across as a sort of really sounding really selfish, but actually we have to prioritize ourselves. And I don't think we've been taught in the way that we've, like we were talking about, the way that we've been brought up. We don't get taught to prioritize ourselves, but actually we should be prioritizing ourselves, not just for our own well-being, but for the well-being of people around us. Because when we prioritize ourselves, that, like I just said, is better for everybody. So yeah, I think it's worth bearing in mind that when you're not setting boundaries, in a way, you're not only sort of lying to yourself, but you're lying to the people around you. Because if you're saying, yes, I'll do this, or yes, I'll go to that, and you're not feeling great about it, or you're not wanting to do something, then actually you're not being honest with the people that you love. So if you sort of flip it round to think that by setting boundaries, you are being much more honest, and by not setting boundaries, you're kind of being dishonest with the people around you, and that can lead to no goods.
It's so true. Yeah, it's about communication, isn't it? You've
Yeah.
got to. It's about, and that can feel uncomfortable. It's when you actually have to speak up and tell somebody it's speaking up and saying it's, but you can do it in a really nice way. It's like, it's made me really think about, gosh, when I was teaching, my last teaching job, I was teaching in a class in year 5, and there were 3 year 5 classes in the year group, and we used to do all our planning together. So we'd do the sort of weekly plan together, and then we would divvy up lessons which we would provide all the resources for, and so you know, it was a great way to work, so that you could share, we could all share each other's resources and lessons. And of the three of us, two of us, you know, would really create amazing lessons, do all the resources and make it as easy as possible for everybody else, and we'd like provide it all. But there was one member of the team who just never did it, never did what she was meant to be doing. So by the time when it came to actually doing the lesson, we, you know, when you're teaching, it literally is flying by the seat of your pants. So it's like literally the morning of the lesson, and there would be nothing, there would be no lesson, there'd be no resources. And it was just, so it would basically make it really, really stressful for the rest of the other two. And me and the other teacher, who, you know, who would always go above and beyond to make really fantastic lessons. It was we found it so difficult to kind of communicate to this other woman, and yet it was just awful. And so yeah, the resentment built. It's like, God, why is she not doing it? So and then it encourages you to be a little bit bitchy and a bit gossipy behind her back. And actually in the end we did, you know, it was the only way forward really, to communicate and say, look, you've got to pull your weight, because otherwise it just doesn't work. It's, you know, and it's going to cause real problems. And actually after that conversation she did start to pull her weight, and I think actually I don't think she even realized, you know, sometimes you think that, you know, people just don't realize, and you've just got to spell it out to them.
Yeah.
And as hard and awkward as that might feel, actually it just is better for everybody in the long term.
Completely, absolutely. I've just thought of something, Polly, which is that one of the things, and this is about saying, you know, the sort of saying no aspect of boundaries, which apparently is the only thing I have anything to say about in this conversation. But going back to that. Going back, now I forgot what I was going to say. No, I know what I was going to say. If you do not want to do something, you do not have to have a reason to not want to do it. It could be that you just don't want to. And I think we feel like, let's take the example of, again, you know, if you don't want to go and do something, whatever that may be, whether it's, I don't know, going to the theatre or going for dinner or whatever it is, if you don't want to do something, you are allowed to not want to do it for no other reason than you just don't want to do it. It doesn't have to be, oh, I can't go to that whatever because I've got this, or I can't do whatever because I've got that. It is okay to just say, actually, I'm going to say no to that because I actually just want a night in on my own, or I was going to use that time to read a fucking book. You know, that is, I think the point is, you don't have to have a reason to say no. If you just want to, it is okay, and there doesn't have to be that kind of massive sort of over explanation as to why. And I think that I get that this can be really difficult, because sometimes if you've got someone going, oh, but you know, oh, but you're not doing anything, and da 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 da, you have to be able to have the confidence in yourself and to just own the fact that you are allowed to say, I love you, I just don't want to do that. It's that excites you, it doesn't excite me. You know, so there it is. And also we have to remember, we have to sort of realize that the people that we love, if something pisses them off, if we put a boundary in place and it pisses them off, that is actually on them. That is actually their problem and their responsibility, not ours. And if it causes, you know, if putting boundaries in does lead to friction, then that's just the way it is. And the people who really understand you and who really love you and who really want to be in your life, they will, even if they're annoyed for a bit, they will kind of get over it and understand that that's just what you need.
Yeah. I think actually that I think people respect you when you actually speak your needs. You know, you're a good example of this. I remember, you know, I asked you, this was a while ago, do you want to come and do this breath workshop with me? And you just very simply went, do you know what? No, I just don't want to. I don't have the time, and do you know, I didn't even think twice. It was like, no, that's great. And rather than, I would have hated it if you had come, or you know, and actually you didn't want to do it. You know, I think hopefully, yeah, you're right. It's very much on the other people. If they can't accept it, it's their deal, not yours, because actually I think most people can accept it. I think it's more us which feel uncomfortable and squirmy about
Yeah,
it, really.
exactly.
A very quick break to ask you to hit the follow or subscribe button if you haven't already. And if you're enjoying this episode, I'd be super grateful if you could hit those stars and rate it too. Thank you.
I'd completely forgotten about that, but yeah, you're absolutely right. But you know what? The interesting thing is that I remember that, and I remember it was a breathwork weekend workshop, wasn't it, in East London? And I remember, and this is classic. At the time, I remember thinking, oh God, you know, how am I going to say no? I feel bad saying no. But then actually, knowing you, I knew that you wouldn't mind at all. And it was just the sort of, and I think in the end I said, look, I just know how I'm going to feel when I get to that weekend, and I just know that I'm not going to want to get to East London for 2 days that weekend because blah 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 blah. And you know, obviously you were totally cool about it, but the point I'm trying to make with this is that there was that part of me thinking, oh God, I feel really bad saying no. But like you say, maybe we should, you know, give people a bit more credit to be able to take it. And actually half the time maybe we're saying yes to things thinking that we're going to piss somebody off if we say no, and actually if we say no, then they're going to be like, okay, fine, cool. And even if they're not, it's not necessarily going to be a big deal for more than about 5 minutes, because as we all know, people are far too busy thinking about themselves to worry about what the hell we're doing. It's something I think about, I remind myself of so much. And I've said this before, I'm sure, on the podcast and on our Monday Motivation / Thursday Thoughts, that, you know, when I worry about, say, posting a reel, that I feel a bit like, oh God, this is a bit, you know, I'm saying something that feels a bit uncomfortable or a bit scary, which actually is a good reason to post it. But I've definitely had many times where I've had to say to myself, you know what, if it triggers somebody, or if it gets somebody's back up, that's okay, because A, that's on them, and B, they're really not going to think about it for more than about 20 seconds when they've scrolled through onto the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. We worry far too much about, we've talked about this so much, and I think it's one of my favorite subjects. And in fact, I said to a friend of mine who I was with this weekend, if I could leave one thing when I die, it would be, please don't worry about what other people think. Please get that out of your head. And if everybody on the planet could just let that go, I think our lives would be so much easier.
Yeah, it's so true. But I also think we've got to have our own, it's also got to just start with your own personal boundaries. Because I'm now, as you're talking, I'm kind of thinking of a particular stage in my life, which is when I really started the beginning of my unraveling, when I was going into my perimenopausal stage. And it's no surprise why, because at the time, I had 3 kids, was working as a teacher. I then, I was a school governor a parent governor at my kids' primary school. So I think someone asked, oh, will you apply for the thing? And, you know, again, I couldn't really say no. And I was thinking, oh, maybe it'd be good for me. So I did that, obviously, and then I got it. I then also, you know, stuff on the PTA at school. This is whilst I also had a job, and Giles was away working. And I was suddenly like, you know, I'd entered into half marathons. It was like all these areas of my life, because I felt like I just had to do all of these things. It was almost like proving to myself that I could do yes, I can do this. Yes, I can do this. It was like saying yes, yes, yes to myself. But actually, I just took on too much, and I was really just like, like paddling like crazy. And I became completely burnt out and not coping at all. But I think, you know, that was only down to me not being able to say no. And I wasn't like I was being forced to do any of these things, but it was my own my lack of ability to be able to say no to myself as well. Like, no, it was almost like I had to prove to myself and to everybody else that I was Superwoman. I could just do it all. And actually, I really couldn't. Well, I did it, but at a cost to myself, and really to all the, you know, particularly to my kids and Giles. You know, I really wasn't a very nice person to be around. So yeah, I had a severe lack of boundaries then with myself, in a way that no one was forcing me, but just, yeah, I think so. So yeah, it is about prioritizing yourself and being really sensible and realistic with what you are actually able to do, which is all of this. You know, if you don't want to go, and now I'm so good at it, you know, if I don't want to go and do something, I just say, yes, thank you so much. You know, thank you for thinking of me. And actually also, I just need to stay. I just don't need to do it now.
No, totally. I've definitely become much better at it than I used to. If you couldn't already tell. But it's just, I think maybe it's also to do with age, isn't it? The older you get, the more you just think, do you know what? Life is too short to be worrying about pleasing everybody around me. You just want to, when I think when you get into your 40s and beyond, this sort of, you understand so much more the kind of how precious life is and how short life is, and how we've got to do the things that we want to do and spend time with the people that we want to spend time with, and all of those things. And actually, one thing before I forget is that anyone who wants to explore the idea of boundaries and how to how to create boundaries, you've got to go and follow somebody called Terry Cole. Do you follow her,
Yeah.
Polly? Yeah. So Terry Cole, she's American. She's awesome. She's such a great lady. In fact, I've actually met her in the flesh in LA. Yeah, in LA in November. In LA in November. Obviously, but no, I did actually meet her, and she's so lovely. But she has got her shit together when it comes to boundaries. She wrote a book called yeah. She wrote a book called Boundary Boss, and she's brilliant on Instagram, and the book is brilliant. So anybody out there who is struggling to put boundaries in place, but knows that they need to start doing it, then seriously do go and follow Terry Cole. I think it's Terry with a double R, TerriCole, and she's fabulous. And get the book, because it's and actually I got the book on Audible. I listened to the book on Audible, and Terry actually reads it, and it's so nice, isn't it, when you listen to a book on Audible and it's the author that reads it. I find that so much better than having a random reading it. So yeah, Terry Cole, she is the boundary boss.
She really, really is, actually. Jen Gottlieb also talks quite well on boundaries as well. In her books, she talks on boundaries. But yeah, and it's just boundaries, I think, in every part of your life, because you can have boundary on relationships, you can have boundaries in your work life, financial boundaries. Are you someone who just like spends, or, I don't know, do you know what I mean? You kind of like, there's boundaries in every single area of your life which you can look at. So actually it's kind of it's good sometimes just to really look at, where do you feel there might be some sort of, where do you feel a little bit uncomfortable in certain areas when it comes to saying no or yes, or, like in terms of earning money. I mean, that's a big one, isn't it?
Yeah.
That fear of asking for for more money, for feeling what you should be being paid. That is money. Maybe we'll leave money for another day. That's a big old subject.
Yeah, that's a whole thing. Yeah, I'm just thinking to finish up how, what tips we can perhaps give to, and I think actually often it comes down to just slightly awkward conversations. It's that classic of, no one likes those awkward conversations, but sometimes it's easier to just face that fear of having that, what could potentially be a slightly awkward conversation, because more often than not, when you have the courage to do that, it's never as bad as you think it's going to be. So it's worth doing it. So I would say, yeah, just have that conversation that you're a bit scared about, and just know that the people around you who love you are gonna, they're most likely going to understand. And always remember that boundaries are there for you, and this is your life, and therefore you get to have control over the things that you do and the things that you don't do, and the things that feel comfortable or uncomfortable. And also just, bear in mind that when you don't set boundaries in place, like we were talking about earlier, resentment can build up, and that can lead to other issues in relationships. So yeah,
A good question to keep asking yourself, if you're having that conversation with somebody and you're feeling a bit awkward, just to ask yourself, well, if I say no, then what's going to happen?
Yeah.
And okay, well, that person, I might offend that person. Okay, well, then what? Well, they might just hold a little bit of a grudge, but really, are they? And then it's like, well, then what? Well, they'll get over it.
Yeah.
Then what? Actually, it kind of peters out, and it's not really a big deal. So I kind of think that is always such a useful question just to ask again and again. Then what? Then what? And actually,
Yeah.
it just all dissipates, and it's not that big a deal.
Completely. And the then what question is brilliant for not just boundaries, but for any area in life, and basically anything that you are about to do that you're feeling uncomfortable about, that you're feeling scared about. Exactly like you say, when you say, well, so what's going to, well, this is going to happen, well, then what? And why is it? If you actually sort of dig down, when you get to the core of it, it pretty much, I think, often comes down to just worrying about what someone's going to think. It's that old chestnut.
Yeah.
So if that's what it's about, then ask yourself, well, why does this matter to me so much, and what is the worst that can happen? Like, and then what?
And if and if you really are truly worried about what that person's is going to think, then actually really question that relationship, because if that person loves you and for who you are, then they're really not going to worry about it. But if they are, if they're not, then maybe there's someone perhaps who you don't, who doesn't need to be in your life at the moment.
Yeah, completely.
Okay.
Well, I think we've filled our half hour, Polly.
We've done it.
Wow. Oh, thanks. Oh, I've just got to flick something else off my screen. It's been a joy as usual.
Yes, thank you. It has been, yeah, good. Well, and also just a good reminder, I think, for us as well. Just it's there is the power of the no, I think, and I think it's just that reminder that when you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else, or when you're saying no to something, you're saying yes to something else. And that is what I generally always come back to and remind myself. It's that sort of real polarity of yes and no. So that's what I shall leave the conversation with.
Say yes to you.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, I'll speak to you soon.
All right, take care.
Bye. Bye. Bye.